Welcome back to You're All Doomed, the podcast that is examining Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday, in 13-minute segments. I'm your host, television tabloid journalist Greg.
And I'm Brian.
And this episode begins with the coroner examining a heart with a scalpel and ends on a fetching redhead.
So the coroner is continuing his examination of Jason's heart, and he mentions that it appears to be filled with a black viscous fluid, and he has no idea what it is. He just knows that it's not blood. As he's scratching the surface of the heart with his scalpel, it slowly starts to beat again.
And I like that you can see the readout on the scale changing, so the pulsating is affecting the relative weight of the heart. It's kind of cool.
Understandably, the coroner can't believe what he's seeing, so he takes a step back and takes a long, hard look at the heart as it's starting to beat faster and faster. And I love the look on his face because he knows what's happening. He just doesn't quite comprehend it. So he's kind of like questioning whether or not he's actually seeing what he thinks he's seeing. But after processing it for a few moments, he picks up the heart and takes a giant bite out of it. He swallows and then
Wait, what?
He picks up the beating heart and takes a giant bite out of it.
You got to be fucking kidding me.
No. In fact, he takes a few more bites of it.
Okay, we're done. I'm out. Forget it.
All right. Well, that's it for this podcast. I've been Brian. And Greg is long gone. And this podcast is all doomed.
What the fuck was that shit, Brian?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like they put on a leather jacket and a pair of water skis and just fucking jumped a shark.
I have no idea what's happening here.
Oh, my God.
I mean, I don't know. Do you think we should keep going? There's 12 of these movies, and we didn't even make it through the first, 20 minutes of the 9th one. I feel like we got to keep going.
To talk about what?
Well, we got to see what happens next. I mean, what happens after he eats the heart?
Great. I'm sure it's going to be awesome. All right. No, I mean, the show must go on. All right, welcome back to You're All Doomed, the podcast that is now forcing itself to watch Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday, 13 minutes at a time. I'm Greg.
I'm Brian.
And this fucking episode starts with the coroner biting and chewing Jason's heart like he's goddamn Daenerys Targaryen at her Dothraki initiation ceremony, and ends with a fetching redhead.
Yeah, so honestly, I would have been less surprised if Phil the coroner whipped out his dick and started jacking off to Jason's dismembered body.
Now that movie would be something to see. Jason Goes to Town.
I mean, I wonder if this was actually meant to be in the blooper reel, but the director just decided to keep it in the final cut.
I mean, my approach to reacting to all of this is going to be desperately trying to at least give credit to the things about it that I like, which are very few and very far between. But this is delightfully vile. The actor is really working it, and he's smearing this black gore all over his face and mustache, and begins burbling up a thick goo, and bellowing and tearing at himself. But then it gets even dumber, because these glowy lights begin flowing from Jason's remains on the table and into the coroner's chest. So we're getting this kind of 80s era special effects bullshit going on too. What the fuck?
My wife happened to walk into the room right as I was watching this scene where he started eating the beating heart. And I said, do you want to see the exact moment where Greg and I knew we were in big trouble when we saw this for the first time in the theater? So she saw the heart beating, and the first thing she said was, that's not what a heart looks like. So fair enough. The second thing she said was, is Jason going to pop out of the heart? Which I have to admit is way cooler than what actually happens.
Especially if he was really tiny.
Right.
That'd be awesome. He's like Ant-Man, but he's Jason.
And he just grows and grows and grows to regular size.
And his little grunts are like, oh, no, no. So, I mean, Brian, do you remember your reaction when this happened in the theater? I've sort of blocked it from my memory.
I feel like I remember it. I remember seeing it in the theater and sitting through that opening honey trap, like FBI scene, and thinking, hey, this is pretty cool. I like where this is going. We haven't really seen Jason cornered before. Mm-hmm. We certainly haven't seen him blown up into a million pieces. So I'm intrigued. I wonder where it's going. I do remember the first kind of like bad feeling I got was when the guy in the cowboy hat was standing off to the side of the FBI raid and, you know, said that he wasn't convinced that this plan had worked. And I was like, all right, well, who's this guy? He's kind of cartoony. Mm-hmm. And then I remember kind of being curious during the autopsy scene and thinking, all right, well, you know, I'm not sure where this is going, but I like the idea of them kind of taking apart literally Jason and trying to figure out what's going on here. But I absolutely remember him biting into the heart and just knowing that we were screwed. Like I kept waiting for it to be like a dream sequence, like he was hallucinating, you know, that like somehow there was this power being extruded from the heart that made him hallucinate eating it. But when it became clear that he actually ate it and all this, you know, beams of light started shooting out of him, I knew we were in big, big trouble.
One of my favorite kind of running gags that we share when we go to movies together is when something ridiculously stupid happens on screen, you know, movie ruining levels. I will slowly turn my head to see your reaction, and you invariably stare straight ahead with no expression on your face and give me a tiny shake of the head like, hold it, we'll talk about it later. And I feel like this might have been the first time that ever happened, but I can't be sure. Nevertheless, I mean, it was a crushing blow because, yeah, you're right. We knew that the next, 85 minutes were going to be a shit show. And to kick that shit show off, we get a shot of a little coroner nerd arriving at the security checkpoint outside the examination room carrying a pizza. He endures a pat-down by Officer Kane, who I kind of get the sense may have playfully goosed the guy's bottom.
Yeah, because he kind of giggles as he's being frisked.
They clear him for access, and he enters the examination room and sits down, not realizing that anything's wrong, and, like all stupid characters in this universe, begins taunting Jason's remains. I did kind of think it was funny that Phil, the coroner, is behind him sizing up the autopsy instruments, trying to decide which implement he will use on this jackass.
Yeah, I had to kind of roll my eyes at the assistant coroner at his taunting of Jason. It's just so, the things that he said is so juvenile and just not something that anyone would really ever say in the situation. He's like, hey, fuck, how you doing, fat ass, maggoty, blown up fuck? And then he flips off Jason and says, suck this, suck it. And then he goes on to say that he wants to take a crap right on his hockey mask. Like, and I think he even says like a big old mango-sized crap. And it's like, what are you? Are you like 12 years old?
Well, and that's going to blow out your O-ring. So fed up with the taunts, Phil the coroner slams this jackass's head down on the exam table and shoves a probe into the back of his head and neck. I do like the shot that we get from underneath the table, showing just how hard the nerd's face was mashed into the grating. Kind of the skin is puckering through the mesh. It was pretty funny.
It's like the Play-Doh barbershop.
Fuzzy Pumper Barbershop. Nice. This jerk was played by Dean Lorey, who was actually one of the screenwriters of this movie. He went on to write and produce quite a bit, including several episodes of Arrested Development.
He also has the honor of being the second coroner to be killed by Jason, with Axel in Part 4 being the first.
And it turns out that he's related to Crazy Ralph.
Right.
Fresh from this kill, Phil the coroner strides out of the room past a reflective surface, but his reflection is of Jason.
This was another thing that really pissed me off because it doesn't make any sense. It's completely illogical because, well, I don't want to give too much away for, what happens in the rest of the movie, but every time we've seen Jason in the past, it's been the physical body of Jason, not just his reflection, but his physical body.
Yeah, and so this is flat out telling us that Phil the coroner has been possessed by Jason and is just kind of a cliched way of reminding the audience that who we're seeing is no longer the middle-aged black man with a mustache. He walks past the security checkpoint outside the examination room and endures some ribbing from the two guards. He's about to pass them by entirely until Officer Kane says that Jason was nothing but a big old pussy anyway.
I do like the edit that we get here because Phil the coroner gives the two guards one last dirty look, and then we immediately cut to a television screen that's showing a show called American Case File. And the footage that they're showing on the show is just outside the autopsy room that we just left. And the reporter says that, two security guards are dead, and they're wondering if Jason Voorhees is to blame for this. So we at least get confirmation that those two security guards are dead.
Yeah, I mean, it was a funny way of learning that Jason kicked their asses immediately. The damage to the victims is a little bit difficult to discern because we're now seeing a TV show within the movie that we're watching. But it looks like Kane's head was slammed against the wall, perhaps, caving in his skull or something. And then the other guy has what looks to be a pretty nasty gouge under his left ear. He was played by Tony Ervolina, who has done some television work and was in the Anna Faris vehicle House Bunny. Looks like he's working primarily in theater now. So American Case File is a hard copy style show that appears, at least in this episode, to be entirely devoted to the Jason Voorhees legend, who, quote, for over 20 years has been terrifying an entire nation. Really? Like, people in California have been worried about Jason? I mean, he seems pretty local other than a quick journey to Manhattan.
Exactly. And if he's been terrifying an entire nation, it goes back to our point that's come up a few times in this podcast, which is if he's so terrifying, then why didn't they take advantage of the two opportunities to recover his body from the bottom of the lake earlier?
Yeah. What kicked him into national prominence? Maybe it was Manhattan. Maybe the federal government wouldn't have given this guy the time of day until, maybe security cameras in Times Square and stuff captured images of this mass killer kicking boomboxes and whatnot. And then, interviewing Rennie and Sean, maybe they learned there's something big going on here. And so maybe that whole Manhattan incident is what really elevated Jason to the national stage.
The reporter goes on to give us a little bit more backstory about Jason, some of which we already knew, but mentions that he was born in 1946 to Elias and Pamela Voorhees. We had heard, Elias mentioned in, I think it was part 6, where there was some potentially deleted scenes where there was going to be, a scene with Elias coming back and going to Jason's grave or something. But
true, but this is the first time that he's actually named in the movies.
That's true. I also cracked up because the reporter said that Jason was believed to have drowned in Camp Crystal Lake at the age of 11. He didn't drown in Camp Crystal Lake. He drowned in Crystal Lake at Camp Crystal Lake. But I know, I'm splitting hairs here.
Well, we are here to split hairs. However, I had no interest whatsoever in this piece of shit to investigate whether or not the 83 confirmed kills they mention is accurate from our count.
I wondered if I should do the research and then decided, nah, it's not worth it.
I figured the screenwriter probably didn't, so why should we?
Right.
We're then introduced to the name Creighton Duke, who is apparently a bounty hunter responsible for capturing 6 of the country's worst serial killers. I wonder if this is an actual job, because I kind of want that job.
Yeah.
Although I do take a slight amount of umbrage at them referring to Jason as a serial killer. because technically the definition of a serial killer, at least in terms of FBI and psychological definitions, is that a serial killer is responsible for 3 or more people over a span of time more than a month and with a distinct cooling off period between killings. Technically, Jason satisfies those requirements, but it is distinct from a spree killer, which is multiple locations with no cooling off period, or mass murderers, which is a single location but no cool-off period. So I feel like Jason kind of straddles a weird line between all 3 of those. He's primarily located in one place, Crystal Lake, unless he winds up on a boat. But it's not like he's doing this for the same reasons that serial killers as we know do them. The cooling off period is more because he's wiped out everybody in his immediate vicinity. If there was an endless stream of people coming in on buses one after the other, he'd keep killing them. So the cooling off periods are not his fault. If it were up to him, he would just keep on going, unless everyone left him alone, in which case he wouldn't bother anybody. It's nitpicking, but I just feel like it's not quite an accurate description of what Jason actually is.
That's fair. I mean, we all know that Jason was following a motive, at least for the first, 2 or 3 movies that he was the main character, and then things got a little hazy after that, so maybe they're just like, let's just call him a serial killer. I have no idea what he is.
We learn that Creighton Duke, the serial killer bounty hunter, is the cowboy hat-wearing gentleman we saw watching the SWAT operation where Jason was blown to bits, and he is being interviewed for American Case File. The host of the program in this interview plays a little bit of a word association game, and throws out the phrase Jason Voorhees, to which Creighton Duke replies, "A little girl in a pink dress sticking a hot dog through a donut." What? This is very emblematic of my primary criticism of this movie. Watching some of the behind-the-scenes footage, I believe it was in Crystal Lake Memories documentary, I learned that even the actor was confused by that line, and it turns out that the screenwriter put it in there because he wanted to make Adam Marcus, the director, laugh. So a lot of this movie, it turns out, is little jokes that these 2 buddies would throw in to try to amuse each other. That works if you're Kevin Smith. I would argue it really shouldn't be done most of the time. And in an instance like this, it makes absolutely no sense and makes the character seem like he's fucking batshit crazy, which he then goes on to confirm in other ways.
I mean, it's like 2 friends starting a podcast to talk about Friday the 13th movies purely just to make each other laugh.
Touché.
No, I have a massive problem with this whole exchange, but especially the little girl in a pink dress. I mean, this isn't Rocky Balboa trash talking Ivan Drago at the pre-fight press conference. It's not like Jason is watching this interview on TV and getting pissed off, cracking his knuckles in anger, like, "Oh, you son of a bitch! Oh, you can't say that about me." Like, who is he trying to appeal to? Like, I know that Duke is just trying to make himself seem tough and that he's not afraid of Jason Voorhees, but it's such a weird way of illustrating that.
Yeah, it's a strange mode of trash talk, to be sure. And let alone the excellent point you make that trash talk has no effect when the object of your trash talk has no way of seeing you trash talking them or even giving a shit what you have to say. We then get to my next big problem with this movie. Out of absolutely nowhere, Creighton Duke launches into this theory about how Jason can wear other people's bodies like a suit. We have watched 8 of these movies, and there has never been any indication whatsoever of anything like that in the least. So I don't know where they think this needs to, why does this need to be introduced? Why would this character even conceive of such a thing? It's absolutely out of left field.
Exposition.
Sure,
but yeah, it's ridiculous. It's like a laundry list of things. It's like, what you think of as Jason is not Jason. The body he's wearing, it's just meat. You mentioned that he wears other people's bodies like a suit. He may get blown up, but that's just a minor inconvenience for him, and he'll just get himself another body. But like you said, since when have we ever seen that happen? There's absolutely, like, you cannot make that connection to any other Friday the 13th movie we've seen.
It's a complete departure with absolutely no evidence. Frankly, I mean, it makes Creighton Duke seem like a deranged lunatic, which is not helped by the fact that he's sitting there playing with a dagger the whole time, and he never blinks. So he's fucking nuts, and I kind of hate him. It's also a little bit self-aggrandizing that, he says Jason is something we've never seen before, but I'm the only one who knows how to truly kill him. And he'll do it for $500,000, which, for trivia purposes, is $878,000 in today's money. He also drops an obnoxious allusion to Quint from Jaws. He says, you'll get the mask, the machete, the whole damn thing. Again, playing into the idea that Jason only ever uses a machete, which is another kind of nails on a chalkboard pet peeve of mine.
But they already had the mask, the machete, and the whole damn thing when they blew him up.
Yeah, excellent point. So what the hell is he going to give them for $500,000?
Because as far as we know, when Phil the coroner left the morgue, other than the reflection that we saw, he was not carrying or wearing the hockey mask. He didn't have a machete in his hand. So as far as we know, all that stuff is still sitting in the morgue. And I'll go get that for $400,000.
And it's an excellent point that he didn't have the machete with him, because the TV program then proclaims that several Jason-style murders have turned up on a direct path from Youngstown to Crystal Lake. How can they be Jason-style if he didn't use a machete?
Oh, shit. Yeah, and it also goes back to what you were saying about why did they take him to Ohio in the first place, and how is Phil the coroner getting back to Crystal Lake? Is he hitchhiking? Did he get on a plane? I'd love to see this like blood-soaked, demonized coroner sitting in a, coach seat on, some Delta flight back to Crystal Lake.
Well, this was pre 9/11, so he could get through TSA pretty easily, I bet.
True.
I did look this up because I was curious. And I used Anchor Lake, which, as I said, is a real place that was apparently close to Crystal Lake. I used that as my baseline. But the distance from Youngstown to Anchor Lake, New Jersey, is 398 miles. Average human foot speed is 4 miles an hour. So it would take about 99 and a half hours, or a little over 4 days, to walk that distance, which you assume Phil the coroner would have to do.
All right. Well, that's kind of cool. Like the idea of him just, taking side streets or whatever to get there and then killing anyone who gets in his way. Maybe he steals a car every once in a while.
So then we get into some logistical questions. I mean, Jason himself in his true body is an unstoppable killing machine, but possessing Phil the coroner's body, does he have the same level of endurance? So, like, does he have to sleep when he's in Phil's body? Does he have to, take a shit? Does he have to, eat? Are there processes that Jason himself would not concern himself with, but now that he inhabits a typical human, is he a slave to their biological urges the way he himself would not be?
I like that, because then you have to wonder if Jason would want to be more selective and, pick, someone that's really strong or young or really fast at running or something that's going to be advantageous to, complete his mission, rather than this kind of like out of shape, middle-aged coroner who probably is going to need, to take a few naps and definitely take a few dumps along the way.
Yeah. I mean, unless maybe the force of Jason's essence fuels the body that he's inhabiting to his specifications. It's all garbage, so who gives a shit? But it's the kind of thing that a screenwriter should consider, at least on some level.
So the reporter, Robert Campbell, goes on to say that he's prepared to offer Creighton Duke the $500,000 payable to him if he can bring incontrovertible proof of Jason's existence and then puts an end to him once and for all.
Why does he need incontrovertible proof of Jason's existence? If the FBI is involved and blew him up, pretty sure they proved he exists.
Another good point. We then cut to a woman watching American Case File. She's a stereotypical small town, waitress in a, stereotypical small town diner. She turns off the TV and she's aghast by what she just saw. She can't believe that this is actually happening. And this is Diana.
Yeah, and she works in Crystal Lake Diner, which I wonder could that possibly be the diner that Annie walks into at the very start of the first movie?
It doesn't look anything like it, but I do like the idea that maybe it is, and I kind of wish that they had gone in that direction. That is a pretty cool idea, especially if the busboy was still there hanging out in the background.
He's now the owner.
Yeah. He's just got his temples are gray now, and he's maybe leaning on the counter a little bit more than he was before.
Yeah, he's leaning on his broom a little harder than he used to. So the Crystal Lake Diner is celebrating Jason's death with a 2-for-1 burger sale. They also serve fried clams and apple, peach, and quadge pies, whatever the fuck that is. I Googled the hell out of it. It's on the board that we see behind Diana as she talks to the proprietor, and it's spelled Kwaj. I almost wonder if it's some special word that the screenwriter and the director share with each other, like they refer to girls as quadges or something, and by putting it in the movie, he's cracking up his buddy because it's just weird and I don't know what it is. An extra large egg cream at the Crystal Lake Diner is only $1, while Franks and Beans are $1.85, but today only. All you can eat fish and chips is $4.59.
Can you think of any, and we'll just say serial killer because that's what they're saying Jason is, but can you think of any serial killer in any town or city in America that would have restaurants that would celebrate his capture or death? Do you think Milwaukee diners were celebrating Jeffrey Dahmer's capture with,
oil drums full of soup,
frozen leg hawks,
brats.
It's just every time something like this happens where you're talking about a character that's a celebrity for some strange reason, I always go back to Tango and Cash, celebrity cops, they're not celebrity cops. There's no city where they're oh, wow, those two cops, they're so reckless and crazy. They're at it again. It's it's always just, blank, police department captures, drunk driver or whatever. There's no celebrity status to it. But here we have Jason that's dead. And do you really think that the people are going to be so excited that they're going to go buy, 2 burgers for the price of one?
I see what you're getting at, and from a real life standpoint, I agree with you. In the movie that we are watching, I do feel like it's a surprisingly sly commentary on modern culture. If you watch any footage of the day Ted Bundy was executed, people had parties and were outside the prison with signs, and they were basically tailgating for the execution of this monstrous serial killer. And it kind of became this little kind of cult anti-fan celebration. And I feel like this movie is kind of playing with that in an amusing way. Plus, he's a local boy, they're... And like I said, I want to point out things that I do like about this movie. And I think it's absolutely hilarious that the rather shrewd proprietor of this diner came up with this 2-for-1 burger offer by making the patties little hockey masks and poking out the extra meat to make a whole separate patty. That's pretty goddamn funny.
I did like that. I tip my hat to that because that is a pretty clever scheme there. This woman is not to be mistaken with Large Marge. It's actually Joey B., the owner of the diner. Diana, the young waitress that we saw just a minute ago.
Young?
We'll get into that too. Diana, the waitress that we saw a moment ago, walks up to a table and Creighton Duke is sitting there. And he orders a Voorhees burger and a side of Jason fingers.
Ugh.
And when she asks if he needs anything else, he introduces himself. But she already knows who he is because she just saw him on that episode of American Case File. And he decides that he's going to tell Diana why he's there. And the reason is that he's going to kill Jason Voorhees, but he needs Diana's help for some reason. And Diana says what everyone already knows, which is, but Jason's already dead. And Duke's like, well, you know that's not true. And he's going to come for her next because he knows who Diana really is.
And establishes himself as a raging asshole in this scene. She has no interest in his ramblings and trying to walk away from the table. He basically sexually assaults her, or at least harasses her to the point where her boyfriend, who is an elderly sheriff, kind of staggers over to intervene. And Duke is just hostile and abusive to everyone he meets.
Yeah, Duke even tells the sheriff to blow him right after Diana gets through doing the same thing to him.
My wife happened to be in the room with this scene going on, and she proclaims that she absolutely hates Creighton Duke, with good reason.
We need to pause here because Duke keeps referring to Diana as the sheriff's girlfriend, but I figured he was kidding because the sheriff is at least 20 years older. Everything about this whole dynamic in this relationship is very odd.
She likes a man in uniform. Duke is ultimately hauled off by a junior officer named Randy, and as he is dragged away, he repeats that Jason is coming for Diana and her daughter.
Dun, dun, dun.
The sheriff kind of feebly tries to comfort Diana, but she kind of lashes out at him and saying she doesn't need him to fight her battles, and then goes and sits at the counter while she's on shift next to a nerd wearing a high school letter jacket but appears to be 40 years old. This is Steven. And Diana tells him that there's something important he needs to know about her daughter, Jessica. So it's a damn good thing that he was sitting at the diner when all this happened. She instructs him to come over to her house exactly at 11 p.m. to learn this important information, instead of just kind of giving him the gist of it right there. But I guess, she works until 10:30 and then has to close for the evening.
Well, in another strange age dynamic, so we learn that Steven is Jessica's boyfriend. Jessica is Diana's daughter, but Steven looks like he is the exact same age as Diana, Jessica's mother. So it's like, I have no idea what's going on here.
And she wants him to come over at 11 o'clock. So
right.
We're getting into some hot MILF action. Or GILF, I guess. Hot to trot, we cut to Steven driving to Diana's house that night and pulls over next to the exact road sign we saw earlier and gives a lift to a trio of hitchhikers who are headed to Camp Crystal Lake now that Jason is dead.
The three hitchhikers get into his early 90s Isuzu Trooper, and they say they've been sitting there for a whole hour. Oh, my God.
Oh, my goodness.
This is Alexis, Luke, and Deborah. They say they're going to Camp Crystal Lake, and in a very Scream-like moment, Steven asks the hitchhikers if they're planning on smoking a little dope, having a little premarital sex, and getting slaughtered. None of them think this is very funny.
No, it's probably the creepiest possible thing that someone who was just pick you up while hitchhiking would say to you in the middle of the night.
Right. I would be like, why don't you pull the car over right now so I can get out? But they say that now that Jason's dead, they just want to go visit the camp to smoke a little dope, have a little premarital sex, and not worried about getting slaughtered. And then Steven's like, oh, to be young again.
3 decades earlier when he was young. It's mentioned that the camp was torn down 2 years ago. So again, the timeline of this universe went down the shitbox basically at the end of part 5, when we knew for sure that took place in 1989. From then on, it's like, why even bother caring? Because we saw the camp get torn down and then rebuilt and then houses got put up and blah, blah, blah. So who knows when this is supposed to be happening?
Alexis, who's the redhead sitting in the passenger seat in the front, who has been in the car for at least 35 seconds, tries to convince Steven to come with them by telling him that they're going to be going skinny dipping.
I gotta question why Steven would turn this offer down. She's clearly into him. She's cute as hell. He has no tangible ties. We get the sense that he has some sort of relationship with Diana's daughter, Jessica, but it doesn't appear to be active. They're on a break, if you want to use Ross Geller's terms. So why would he pass up this chance? I mean, she's, delightful.
Could it be that he's a fucking idiot?
That might have something to do with it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've never met a girl in my entire life that, after meeting her 35 seconds earlier, asks me to go skinny dipping with her. But if that ever happened, you bet your ass I'm going to say yes.
So basically, this chunk ends with Steven being a total fucking idiot. We've had 3 confirmed deaths, the assistant coroner and the 2 security guards, but the news program did allude to several other murders that Jason committed while traveling from Youngstown to New Jersey. We don't really know for sure exactly how many.
I could hear the air quotes around Jason when you said it. To find out about my favorite place to eat some low-calorie Greek yogurt, go to bed at a reasonable hour, and avoid breaking any rules that might get us in trouble with local law enforcement, tune in next week for another episode of You're All Doomed.